It was supposed to be a smooth transition between sound going and then not sound going, but that's all right. Good morning, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. Today we're going to be discussing the Realist tax system. Before we get started with the course content, I did want to run through just a couple basics of the class and how we're going to be doing things through Zoom today. So by default, everyone is going to be starting on mute. What'll end up happening is that we have a Q&A section down there at the very bottom. It's just a little button you can push. It'll bring up a spot for you to type out any questions that you have. We also have the option to hit that raise hand button down at the bottom. That'll allow you guys to at least make it known that you have a question that you would like to ask, and I can get you unmuted if need be. Also, we have a chat section. This is going to be excellent if you guys have any commentary you would like to add or any stories you would like to share, whatever the case may be. I also wanted to point out we will have the session recorded, and I'll be sending you guys a link to this class after the class has ended. Also, if you do end up having any audio or video issues during the course, let me know either in chat, Q&A, doesn't matter. If you guys are having some kind of technical problem, I want to make sure that we know as quickly as possible. If we are ending up with multiple people having the same issue, maybe only one person can get through, so just don't hesitate to let us know if you guys have any audio problems, if it's cutting out often, or if the video cuts out or lags too much, or you get disconnected. If it does turn out that you get fully disconnected, like you've left the webinar session, just give us a call over at the service desk and we can see what we can do to troubleshoot that and get that started up again for you. Finally, I did want to mention this is not a CE credit class quite yet. The good news is we've actually submitted so that all of our classes that we currently offer will be CE soon. We're still waiting on OREC to give us the approval for that, and we'll probably be making an announcement about that as soon as it's actually completed. But in the interim, for now at least, the Realist class is not a CE class, but depending on when it is that they actually give the approval, since we are going to be going through all of the same rigmarole we go through for all the CE classes, we might be able to retroactively get this some CE credit. But for now, just assume that it won't be, just so that you don't have any false expectations in case they drag their feet on getting that CE credit assigned to this. Anyway, in the interim, down there at the very bottom of your screen, you can see those three buttons that we've mentioned already. You've got the chat option for any commentary, Q&A for any questions, raise hand if you guys would like to ask a question with your voice. If you're joining us on a mobile device, just as a reminder, raise hand is going to be for that request to get unmuted. Especially if you guys are on mobile, typing out on a chat or a Q&A might be a little bit cumbersome depending on how large your screen is. So it might be ideal to just hit that raise hand option, but I'll be keeping an eye out for those along the course. Oh, it just showed a duplicate. Anyway, I think we should be all set. So we, again, are going to be discussing the Realist tax system today. I did want to mention one thing, just as far as the expectations for the actual course today. We will have a 10-minute break at the top of the hour. So we'll be going through some of the essential basics at the beginning of class, and then we'll cover a lot of the map-based stuff, as well as how to do some searching, exporting, printing labels, and things like that in the second half of class. So we'll go ahead and get started. We should be, yeah, we should be good to go. All right. We only ended up missing one person that had originally signed up. So doing pretty good. All right. So again, my name is Mike Dane. I'm the training director for MLS Technology. The class we're going over today, again, is the Realist tax system. This is a member benefit that's being provided to you guys. And if you notice, there's a common theme between both Matrix and Realist. Both of these are a product of CoreLogic. So while we're going through everything today, I did want to mention there's a lot of interconnectivity between Matrix and Realist. I'm going to be pointing out a few specific examples whenever we get into the reports for a specific property. But I just wanted to clarify that both of these are made by the same company. There's a lot of information that passes between both systems. So if you guys have been through our matrix class, you may have heard me mention, or even our advanced matrix class, there is a public record search that you guys have access to in matrix. This is where you guys can go through and run any of your tax search functions. It's a little bit oversimplified by comparison to what you guys have access to in the full version of Realist. But all of the data that's actually being provided within this tax record search in Matrix is all coming directly over from Realist to begin with. So the Realist tax system by nature is actually going to be gathering all the details that they can from every county assessor's office in the country. Now, the system that we have access to through our MLS is actually going to have that at least narrowed down a little bit in focus, so that what you guys should have access to is going to be the 77 counties that we have here in Oklahoma, and then we have the 7 neighboring counties over in Arkansas. Now, all of the search functionality that we have within Realist is going to be dependent on what the counties are, with only a couple exceptions. Now, the counties obviously are going to include thousands, hundreds of thousands, just an immense amount of information for each and every county, of property details, of parcel details, of the zoning, of the lines for the school districts. Like there's just an immense amount of information that's been put in there. So when you guys first get into Realist, the first thing that you guys need to consider is narrowing that focus so that instead of it being, a bunch of different counties that you might not be working in right now, just come up to this change county option up at the top left corner. And you'll see over on the right-hand side, any of the counties that you currently have selected. And in this center area, we're going to be selecting which counties we're working with. Now, it's an important note that when you guys are looking through this on its default screen, it's going to be starting us off with this all states option. So let's say I wanted to come down and add in Washington County. I actually have 2 options here. We've got Washington, Arkansas, and then Washington, Oklahoma. This is where Bartlesville is. But if you guys are getting in here and not really looking too closely, you might accidentally add the one for Arkansas. And then of course you're trying to find something on Highway 75 and lo and behold, it's not there. So just keep track of that. There's actually an easy way to make sure that you don't make those kinds of mistakes. Over on the left-hand side, instead of leaving it on the default of all states, you can switch it down simply to Oklahoma. You'll notice that this is a little bit shorter list. Again, it's going to have all 77 counties here in this state. And then we can always switch over to Arkansas if we needed to actually add in one of the ones for, Fort Smith, or whatever the case may be. Now, an important note beyond even just adding these checkboxes here where it's going to start adding any of the extra counties we've chosen to the right, you'll see that we have a recording date assigned for each and every county. So if I wanted to find out when it was that we last got fresh information in Ada, I would be adding Pontotoc County, and then I'll see underneath the Pontotoc County name over here on the right, we have when it was that we last got fresh data. So that recording date that it's actually mentioning there is the last time the county assessor's office sent fresh information to Realist and was subsequently added in for you guys to be able to access. This does mean that if you guys are going to look up something that was relatively recent, it may be best to double check that recording date, because if it has been something that's had a change to it within that time frame, you might not see anything about it outside of some information that might have passed through Matrix. We'll be talking about how that looks in a little bit here, but this is just a valuable piece of information that you guys will have access to either on this change county screen, or once we're actually set with the counties that we've chosen and we hit apply. When you get back to that previous screen where we had the basic search functions, and up here at the top, we can see the counties and our change county button that we initially clicked. If I hold my cursor over multiple counties selected, I can see the recording date for each of the counties that I currently have selected. So again, that way, if you guys are looking at some data and you're like, wait a second, I know for a fact that property has sold. Why is it not showing here on the tax record yet? You can hold your cursor over that top left section and find out when it was that you guys got last, or that when it last was that you guys got fresh information from the county assessor's office. Now, on the initial screen that we landed on here, it started us off with the quick search functionality. This gives us 4 basic spots for us to search with. So we've got the address. You'll notice it already has an example area in here. So we've got 123 Main Street, city, state, zip. You won't necessarily need to add in all of the details about the address in order for you to find results. So the good news is you don't have to have all of that in hand ready to go. Even if you end up just having an address without the city, state, zip, or if you just have the address and just the city, there's a likelihood you'll find what you need. We'll talk about more of the result-based information in just a minute here. We also have a section here for the owner name. I would recommend actually following the order that they show here, where it's last name, first name. So if you had someone specific that you were trying to keep tabs on or find the information on the property that they own, you can type in their information, last name, and then first name. But there's also a little button over here to the right. So for instance, if you guys do end up maybe having somebody and you're not sure about how to spell their last name, or you just needed to combine a search for multiple last names at the same time, what you can do is just type in a name, click the plus, and you notice how that separates that out so that we now have space again to add in another last name for us to search. Just so you guys are aware, whenever you start adding in multiple last names, it's going to be adding all of the results that are Smith to all of the results that are Johnson. So just bear that in mind when you guys are running a search. You're going to be dramatically increasing how many results you have whenever you start adding in extra bits of information. It's not going to try and look for any crossover. Matrix has that capability of doing kind of a little bit more of a logic on that. But with Realist, it's just going to be saying this or that or that or that, and so on. We also have a space here that you can add in an MLS number. So if you guys already have a listing number from Matrix, you can just paste that in there and go directly into the report for the property. Makes it quick and easy so that you guys don't have to spend quite as much time looking for things or grabbing the address in order to search for it. If they've already gotten the tax ID connected with the listing number, this will make that process a whole lot easier. And speaking of the tax ID, finally have another space down here at the very bottom. It's going to be just for entering tax information. That's either parcel ID. Some counties might refer to it to an account number. My usual recommendation, and this is going to be rare exceptions, but my usual recommendation is that if you have a number that's been given to you that's either the tax ID or the parcel number or the account number, whatever the case may be, if it has a bunch of hyphens or dashes in it, that's probably the one that Realist is going to be looking for as well. So for instance, if you have like, some of the counties are kind of obnoxious with it, they'll have like a bunch of zeros. So if you see something that looks like that, where it's just a bunch of zeros or dashes, or even just a bunch of numbers with dashes in between, that's probably the tax ID that it's looking for. Now, I mentioned before when we were discussing the counties and the selection that would actually allow us to narrow our focus. One of the important notes on this quick search page is that whenever we're searching for things, the address field up here at the top is actually going to allow us to skip any of the restrictions that we have on the counties that we've chosen and just allow us to search for anything that's in the system whatsoever. Now, that means that you guys might be able to find properties that are really far away, even if it's in a different state. And I can see down here at the very bottom. Oh, I should have chosen something from Arkansas, but whenever you guys are running your searches, it is going to expand beyond whatever the counties are. So if you guys do have a specific address in a county that you have not chosen up the top here, you will be able to track it down, even if it's not within them. The owner name and the tax ID, on the other hand, are going to start obliging whatever the counties are that you've chosen. But again, MLS number, it's just going to find whatever you put in there. It's not going to bother trying to restrict you to just the counties you've chosen. Now, once we're done with our basic search, like for instance, if I'm not finding what I need, or maybe I need a little bit more nuance to what I'm searching for, we have an option to switch over to this My Search function. Now, the My Search function is going to dramatically increase how much we can search by. And what I'm going to do is, just so you guys are aware of all the basic information, I'm going to switch over to this General Query option. This is a saved search. We're going to be talking about how to create new searches and save your own searches later. But in case you guys are on some other customized version of the screen, switch over to the General Query so that we can actually see what's on that. Now, the General Query, the one that had that little gold padlock on it, is actually a system-wide default. So what that means is that whenever we get into Realist, whether you guys are doing it in our MLS or if you guys do that in a completely different MLS somewhere else in the country, you'll always have access to that general query, and you'll always have access to the same 4 spaces in these quick search. When you get into the general query, it's going to give you that owner name option that we saw on the previous screen. Again, this is all going to be restricted by the county. Then we've got a house number, street name, and street suffix. So instead of it just being, the full address as we might write it out for an envelope, this time it's going to be broken down into its parts and pieces. Now, just as a reminder, when you guys are looking at an address, the house number is going to be the very beginning of the address. The street name isn't necessarily going to include anything other than just, let's say it's South Main Street. When you put in the street name, you're just typing in Main. You're not going to add in the South, and the street is actually going to be put under street suffix. So for instance, instead of putting all of that into one place, like you might do if you were working in transaction desk, for instance, you just have to focus into just the name itself. I know sometimes there are some streets that are kind of ambiguously named. We've actually had a couple calls about that recently, where you'll be looking for a street name that's actually in the tax record and maybe on all the paperwork that you have, but you can't find that street name in Matrix. One of the first things that we're going to ask you for is, do you have the address where I could look it up as the tax record? Because if I can see the street name on the tax record, I can add it to Matrix. But we'll end up having requests for things where it's like Lovely Lane. And so supposedly Lovely Lane is the street's name. But in this case, Lane is actually the street's suffix. Lovely is the actual street name. So just bear that in mind whenever you guys are coming across some of those, like Lane is the one that I just see that happen with the most, that people think that that's actually part of the street's name, and it's not. But anyway, we also have a space down here for the subdivision. We've reported this issue already, but there's just a quick side note workaround that we have to mention. You'll notice that whenever we ended up switching our county, the subdivision option here actually doesn't allow us to select from the list. So if you have switched your counties, make sure that you guys come up to the top of your browser and hit the refresh button. If you guys are doing this on Chrome or Firefox, there's a nice little circle button up here at the top. It might be next to your address bar in a different browser. Whatever the case may be, you can just click that little refresh button and it'll allow you guys to search by the subdivision now. Again, we've reported that information to them. They're still working on trying to figure out what exactly is causing that. But again, the only time you should actually have to worry about switching, the only time you have to worry about not having access to that subdivision is if you changed your county, and just, again, hit that refresh button or even just click on the address bar and hit enter. You guys will have access to it then. But in the interim, once you guys have access to that select from list button, click on select from list, and you'll notice that this is going to start having a little bit of a familiar layout. We're going to see this actual layout happen several more times whenever we're going through all of the different functions and tools that we have in Realist, what's going to end up happening is that there's always going to be a section over here where we can select things. And then over on the right-hand side will be the list that shows all of the items that we've selected. Now, in this case, instead of having a couple of categories over here on the left where we had, in the county's case, the states that we were looking at, up here at the very top, we can now actually search for subdivisions. Let's just do Minchell Park, hit enter, and I can see all of the subdivisions within those counties that I had initially selected. So I check the checkbox for each of the ones that I was interested in searching within, and I can see them added over here on the right. Now it's worth mentioning when we're searching for subdivisions in Matrix, you may find yourself adding in the asterisk at the beginning and end in order to make sure that you're finding everything that includes the words that you put in between those asterisks. But in the case of Realist, it's just going to be doing a full-on search. So you notice Minchell Park is included towards the end of this subdivision. It's the beginning of this one. There's another one here where it mentions Minchell Park twice in the name for whatever reason. Whatever the case may be, if you guys do end up running a search in Realist, you don't have to worry about putting in those asterisks. But now that I've gotten all of these selected, I can hit apply. And you notice that we can see all of these have been added with a little trash can to the right of them. Now we can clear all of this off with this big clear all button, or you can individually grab certain ones and just get rid of them. And as we're actually adding and removing details, criteria, whatever the case may be, we will see this view results option down here at the bottom start updating the number each time. So watch what happens when I end up taking away Minchell Park 4. It thinks about it for a second, and now we have about 100, 200 less properties available. Click on the next one, same thing happens. This is also going to be true as you're adding details. So for instance, if I had a specific property in mind, I can type in the beginning of the address. You'll see I've got 13 matches within the counties that I chose. If I type in Riverside, I can get down to one match. Now there's a couple different ways that the information will be displayed whenever we've run a search. So I'm switching over to the split view, just in case you guys saw me do that. This is actually the default view. We're going to be talking a lot more about the map later, which you can switch to here, or you can switch to list. But I'm going to leave it on the default for now, just so you guys can see what it looks like. But let's say that we do end up searching for a specific subdivision. When we look at the results, it's going to end up showing us a list over on the side, and then it's going to add on dots to the map so that we can see where each of those properties is located. This is the first and primary view that we're going to see whenever we're searching for properties, is that it's going to provide you a whole bunch of results, and they're going to show up in this list over here, and then we're going to see all of the dots added to the map. If there was one that I was specifically looking for, I can click on it. It'll highlight where that's located. Of course, with a subdivision that's quite as dense as Minchell Park, it's going to be hard to see. So it might be beneficial for us to zoom in. But you can also do the opposite. So instead of just clicking on this and then having it kind of refocus the map for us, if I click on one of these dots, so for instance, if I needed to know about this particular property on the corner, when I click on that dot, it'll highlight it on the screen so we can click on the report here. And it'll also highlight it somewhere on here on my list, which it normally would do. Well, it looks like it's attempting to. This might be something else that we have to report as well. But under normal circumstances, if you click on the dot on the map, it's going to end up highlighting the one that's actually relevant on here as well. Oh, it is. It's actually moving it. It just happens to be up at the top. Let me try a little further down here. There we go. That's what it's doing. It is shifting it down for us. It's just not highlighting it visually. Anyway, but this allows you to just quickly jump into a specific property. Now, the point of Realist is that you guys are going to be able to get into specific details on the tax records information. So if I wanted to find out more about a specific property, I can either click on it here and hit report, or we can click on the reports button, which will actually open all of the reports at once. And we can click through those over here on the left-hand side and see each and every property's information. Now, we're going to be lingering on these property reports in a little bit here, but I just wanted to give you guys a little preview of what it's going to look like to find your search results. So again, this is going to be one of the main views that we see. But let's say that we do end up expanding our search so dramatically that we actually can't fit all of the results onto one page. So for instance, if I did end up doing something like searching for Smith, for instance, I'm going to see, let me clear my results first. Smith. Got 32 matches. That can't possibly be true. Well, anyway, let's run our search and find out what's happening. That is all the Smiths in the system. Oh, it's because I have it set to is, excuse me. That's what we were hoping for. All right. And I apologize. I must have saved a default on here with the alternative options. By default, your owner name is actually going to start with, or excuse me, it's going to be defaulting to this starts with option, the same way that the quick search does. I'm not sure why it changed my default on that, but under normal circumstances, this is what it's going to look like. Starts with, you put in your owner name, and then when you run your search, you notice that we have, just shy of 3,000 results. If I hit search on this, instead of it just starting to populate a bunch of dots on the map and give me a list down here, it's going to tell us that we have more than 1,000 results. And we can choose either to refine our search down further, because maybe I didn't realize that I was going to end up with so many results, or I didn't look down here at the bottom, or we can actually just show the first 1,000. It's going to put all of those dots on the map. Then I'll actually have to move between the results using these options down here at the bottom. Now, this isn't necessarily the ideal. It used to be that we are actually hard capped at just only showing the first 1,000 results. You'd have to manually start narrowing your search focus a little bit. But in our case, we do have the option now to switch between all of the different results up to the first 3,000. Now, this isn't necessarily ideal, but if you are searching for a whole bunch of properties all at once, it is possible. Now, we also have the option, if need be, to search for something that's not going to provide us any results. Let's do whatever. We'll just add in a bunch of random letters. Hopefully there's nobody with that name. Seems like that'd be hard to pronounce. If we do end up putting in any criteria that we would not be able to find a result, it's just going to give you a little error message up here at the top. But again, if we see that there's no results down here at the bottom, we don't even need to hit search in order to get that prompt. We can just see that whatever I put in has found 0 results. Now, that's going to be the second option. We either end up with getting a bunch of results and they get put onto the map and everything gets filled out. We can select which one we want to look at. Or if you guys end up in a situation where you found exactly the property that you're interested in, you guys will actually see that pop up down here at the bottom with one match. And whenever you hit enter or search, it's just going to dive directly into that property. So I'm going to put in an example property for us to use. So 5125, the full address is 5125 South Sandusky Avenue. I'm only going to be putting in 2 pieces of information in this case, the house number and the street name. And that's most of the time all you'll need to actually track down a particular property. And as you can see, just those 2 pieces of information, in combination with the counties that I've chosen, has produced 1 match. So this time, instead of it putting a line on here where I've got the address, the information, and then some random dot that's on the map, hopefully in the right spot, when I hit search this time, what it's going to do is it's going to do that in the background, but immediately open up the report for the property. The expectation being that if you guys run a search, you're not wanting to see the single dot on the map, have to click it, click report, or have to click it here and click report. whenever you're searching for one property, you want to dive directly into the results property details. So this is immediately going into the public records for this particular property. Now, up here at the top of the screen, we can see we've got some extra tabs up here. This is going to start us off with all of the basic information about the property's attributes. We also have a tab that we're going to be discussing later, going over the comparable properties in the area. This is mostly automated, but we do have some options to kind of narrow the focus a little bit or make sure that we're expanding or contracting our search criteria enough to be able to allow us to see more information. We also have a market trends tab. There was a brief moment where this tab was actually removed, primarily because not too many people were using it. I'm going to try and reinforce at least a couple of the things that are actually useful about that particular tab. We also have a section here that shows any of the immediate neighbors of the property in question. And then finally, kind of an overview of the neighborhood called the neighborhood profile. Goes over a lot of the demographic information, quality of life details, what schools and businesses are in the immediate vicinity. We'll talk about that at the end before we move to the map search. So starts us off again on our property details tab, where we see right up here at the top, the long form of the address. It's going to have the full street address, the city, the state, the zip +4, and also the county as well. Now, recently we started having this extra visual added where we see the APN, or what's referred to as the clip. The APN is actually one that you guys might want to keep track of because, as you notice, that actually matches our tax parcel number. So instead of having to scroll down to the tax parcel number, you can see that under this APN. This is going to be useful in a couple different other systems like Transaction Desk and Matrix. For the most part, you'll know when you need it, and it'll be right there when you have to. This clip option is actually a reference number to this particular parcel of land, and this is actually something that's universal for all of Realist. So if somebody else in a different Realist system has access to Tulsa County, and it's not in our MLS, they're in a different state or whatever the case may be, they will have the exact same clip number, and hopefully they'll also have the same APN number as well. It depends on how they visualize that information. We call the tax parcel numbers tax parcels rather than APN. Anyway, immediately below that, we have some basics about the property. Now, this is going to be a contextual addition. So in this case, we see that this is a single family residence as the type. And subsequently, that means it's going to try and display the bedroom count, the bathroom count, the square footage, etc. If this were vacant land or a commercial property, it's going to recognize what type of property it is and give you relevant data based on what type it is. So that way you're not having to worry about, oh, I just pulled up a, warehouse somewhere and it's still showing bedroom count is 0 for some reason. No, it'll always try and contextualize that. Now we're also seeing a couple pieces of information in here that are actually showing to us this MLS as a prefix. Now, depending on the county that you guys are working in, there may be some omissions from the county's data that they have for each property. The glaring example that we have here in Tulsa County is that it's actually missing the bedroom count. Tulsa County also doesn't keep track of maybe the total bathroom count. It might be keeping track of full bath and half bath, but doesn't aggregate those into one number. So it might be that this total number of baths is actually coming over directly from the MLS. Now, this MLS sales price and MLS sales date might also be interchanged with a closing date that was actually entered into the tax records. It's all going to depend on what was the most recent or a variety of other reasons why it might not show that. But if you do see that MLS prefix in front of anything, that's indicating that that actually came over directly from Matrix. So as I mentioned towards the beginning of class, since CoreLogic actually developed Realist and Matrix, there's a lot of interconnectivity between the details that are being passed back and forth. So wherever there's something that's missing from the tax record that was entered into the MLS as a listing details, has been verified, sold through the MLS, whatever the case may be, it's going to be able to track that information down and augment your tax record information with the details from the MLS, so that you always get a little bit more complete image than what just the tax record shows or what just the MLS might show. Now, it's going to be broken down into different sections as we go through the rest of this. Each of these sections actually has a little collapse and expand button. So for instance, if you guys are only interested in certain pieces of information, instead of having to scroll, you can just collapse these down until you find, oh, this is what I needed, the assessment year, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here's the difference. Okay, but we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But as we discuss each of these sections, I'm going to be collapsing them. Just wanted you guys to know what you can do and why you might need to do that. So starting off with our owner information, we can see the owner's name appear at the top. Then immediately below that, we've got the tax billing address. Now, this is a quick and easy way for you to find out whether or not this is an owner-occupied property. So if the owner does live in this property, we might notice that this tax billing address matches whatever the property's address is. And in fact, even though that may seem a little bit rudimentary, that's also how the system is trying to keep track of whether or not this is an owner-occupied residence. If they have a PO box, it might be a false positive, but the vast majority of the time, that's how it's going to end up working out, is that if you see the tax billing address matches, the owner lives in that property. Next section down is going to be our location information. This section is important because when you guys are adding in any listings into our system, the subdivision information has to be entered, and it's going to have to match whatever the tax records show. So when you first get into listings and or properties information, it's right there at the top. We can see what the exact subdivision's name is. It's also going to show us the school district that they're in, what it's zoned as, and it even includes the township range and section. Now we do end up getting calls from time to time from people where they're concerned about a new listing that they're adding into the system, and lo and behold, they don't think that it has a township range and section. Not to worry, every part and piece of this entire state has a township range and section. So again, this is just the 19th north quadrant, 13 east, and then of course section is 33. So within these, within this quadrant, this is the section that that property resides in. This is ubiquitous. Every property in the state has this. I have noticed that some of the rural areas maybe don't talk about it quite as much, or you might think that it's still under is it meets and bounds or mets and bounds? Anyway, it's not. The whole state is covered. So when you guys are adding a listing into the system, you can just quickly grab the details from this tax record. And by default, at least, if the subdivision has actually already been added to Matrix, you won't necessarily have to even put in the township ranges section. It should already be attached to the details that we put in for the subdivision. But if there is any confusion or problems, or if you guys notice the subdivision is missing from Matrix, give us a call over at the service desk, just like we mentioned earlier with street names that are missing. We'll have to get the address. We'll have to find out the details from the tax record information. But once we verify that, we can just import the information in. It's worth mentioning that if you guys are working with a subdivision that's very new, so for instance, if you have any new construction, or I mean, there's a variety of reasons it might not have already been put in. If you do have a new subdivision that's not present in Matrix and it's not showing up on the tax records, we will need the filed plat. So not just the plat that the builder construction company is working with. We need the one that's been filed with the county and shows their stamp, shows the signatures on it, and all the information that represents that it has actually already been registered with the county. Once we have that information, which is actually, this, you guys might know what those filed plats look like. They're huge. They've got a bunch of information on them, but they're also going to include what the school district is, what the city, what the zip code is, what the township range and section is. All of those details can then be added. But again, if it's missing completely, even from the county records, we're going to have to get that filed plat in order to be able to validate that. Now, next section down is our tax information. I mentioned already that this tax parcel number is going to be what you would have to put into a bunch of different systems outside of Realist. So oftentimes, if you guys are adding a listing into the system and you guys needed to maybe import over from Realist so that you guys don't have to fill out quite as much information. When you're adding that new listing in, you can import over directly from Realist on that Add Edit page using the Fill from Realist option. Choose whichever county it is, put in that tax parcel number as the tax ID that it's asking for, and when you search for that, you'll be able to fill from that particular tax record information. So you'll notice that when I finally get to the screen, I've already got my house number filled out, the street name, county, state, year built, etc. So then the only thing that I actually have to add in might be a couple extra details like the subdivision that's missing, etc., etc. Same thing goes with Transaction Desk. If you guys are in Transaction Desk, when you start up a brand new transaction, one of the very first things that it's actually asking you to do beyond just giving it a name is whether you would like to import from another source. So when I click on this Create Transaction button, I can import data directly from Realist. And just like we did when we were trying to do the Add Edit matrix, we just choose which county it was that the particular property is in, and then the tax ID that it's going to look for is the parcel number. So if I were to create this, as soon as I get my details pulled up here, you'll see that it's already got a bunch of the information filled out for me. And again, all of that was because of this tax number, so the tax parcel number that we saw in Realist. So very useful, keep track of that information. It's also worth pointing out any of the listings that have actually had that tax parcel number added in there are going to automatically be connected in Matrix to the tax information. So it makes it a lot easier to actually do your research on a project or on a property if you've added that into your listing. There are some people that feel that since it's not a required field in Matrix, that they don't have to do it, even if they have that information available. But I promise you, if it's beneficial for you guys to see the information, other agents are going to also get some benefit from it as well. Anyway, next section down. This one's one of my least favorite sections to cover. It just shows you guys the assessment and tax information. If you guys need it, it's available. The big plus about having this information laid out this way is that when we get to the tax year, we can see what the estimated tax was. So again, just remember that this is an estimate, not what they actually paid. But when you see that estimate, you can see the next year down, what the exact change was, and what a percentage change was, in case there might be any trends going up and down. And then the same thing goes with the next year and the next change relative to the last year. So that way we don't have to worry about if a client's like, well, you know, is my tax going to dramatically increase? Well, I can't guarantee it, but at least from the trend, it doesn't look like that's going to be happening. A little further down, we have our characteristics settings or characteristics section. This is going to include all of the details that you guys might be looking for if you're adding a brand new listing and you guys just needed to verify some of the information to make sure that the client has provided you the right details. Now, I mentioned already that whenever we do have omissions on tax records, it's going to give it a little bit of an MLS prefix, and we can actually see that illustrated over here to the right. So the rest of these details, for the most part, are all just coming over from the county, but we can see the garage capacity and Tulsa's case, no bedroom counts are being tracked anywhere in this whole county for whatever reason. So we need to actually get that information from the MLS in order to find out. So here we can see I've got my total number of bedrooms is 3, total number of bathrooms according to the tax record is 3, whereas we've got an MLS total baths showing 3 again, full baths, fireplaces, so on and so forth. So if we do end up in a situation where there is a discrepancy, so for instance, if you find yourself looking at a property record and it's showing that there's actually a tax number and an MLS number, it'll end up looking like what this little pop-up shows when I hold my cursor over just any of the fields here. So it'll say tax and then the number, MLS and then the number. In those cases, I would very strongly suggest that you guys try and clarify that information, because if it does turn out that there's a problem with the tax record information, well, buying or selling the house is going to try and refresh that information anyway. But if there's a previous listing that actually was either more accurate or inaccurate, you may end up needing to discuss that with the client as well. So if they knocked out a wall and suddenly the tax record was showing one, but the MLS that was recently listed and expired shows a different number, you might need to ask them what happened. So next, after our characteristics, we've got the sell score indicator. Now, the rest of the stuff that we've been looking at so far has been pretty cut and dry, just county record information, whatever. Now we've got a couple sections here that are going to be specific to Realist. Now, this sell score indicator, as you guys can see by this little description that it has here, let me zoom that in so we can see that a little clearer. The sell score indicator indicates the relative likelihood a property will be listed for sale in the next 6 months. Now, just by default, a lot of red flags might have just raised in your brain because that's a pretty bold statement. But what this is trying to indicate is this market in this area either hopping, or are the features of this particular property extremely desirable? Now, in this case, since I've been using this exact same property to do this class for almost 4 years now, it's worth pointing out that this number I've gotten to watch go up and down. At its peak, which was, I want to say it was sometime in mid to late, like probably July through October, I think, of 2020, when the real estate market was just bonkers. We noticed that this number actually went all the way up into the 800s. So like into this very high option. Well, if you guys haven't noticed, the last time this property actually sold was in 2012. So, and I think that actually was mentioned up at the top here. So 2013 was the actual close date on it. So this particular number being up in that very high likelihood, even though it was giving us this idea that, here we have the real estate Nostradamus trying to tell us that we're going to have to, contact these sellers and see if they're interested in selling. This might mean nothing. It may still be that this couple wants to live here for the rest of their life. Like if I buy a property, I'm not moving. I have one more move left in me, and then I don't want to move ever again. So that might be the case for them too. But if the market is booming enough, if they maybe are empty nesters, this might be a good way for us to know, well, the market's booming in your area. It might be a good idea to send them a note. But when we discuss how to actually get rid of some of these fields, especially if you guys just don't want to see this or maybe don't want to include this next section we're going to be discussing, we can customize that view and get rid of both of those. So not to worry, if you guys don't like the idea of this or don't want to show it on your reports when you send things out, this is easy to get rid of. So next section down, we have our estimated value. Now, estimated values just automatically raise a lot of red flags for a bunch of people, and I totally understand. A lot of us have been burned by that Zestimate that Zillow has, other AVMs that people have come up with where it's just not providing a particularly accurate estimate of what the true value of that property is. And especially since that oftentimes will end up undercutting your expertise as a real estate agent, that you actually do know what you're doing and you actually have a little bit more accurate estimate that you've used with your expertise and knowledge of the market and the area, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in this case, this is one of the numbers that at least is going to be closer to an accurate depiction of what the value of a property should be. And part of the reason I say that is because this particular AVM, which is an automated valuation model, is a branded CoreLogic product. So what that means is that this isn't just using the standard AVM principles, which is just grabbing tax data, checking what the most recent tax record was for how much the property sold for, check a specific time frame to make sure that you're looking for properties that are relevant, et cetera, et cetera. What this one's doing is, instead of just relying on all of those things we just discussed, it's going to include any of the MLS details as well. So beyond just things that might have sold, which could include FISBOs, which typically sell for less, we'll see that in the market trends. What we're actually seeing here is the inclusion of any of the properties that are currently available for sale through the MLS, as well as any of the sales records, either from the MLS, which means that the county hasn't collected it, or from the county as well. So it's going to have a lot more detail and a lot more clarity to what the actual number should be. Now, in our case, you guys might have noticed a trend here, or maybe even started trying to kind of guess what the accurate value might be. If you guys notice that this number is wildly inaccurate or pretty spot on, just let me know. I'm always interested to know because I don't do this for a living. I work with computers, so I'm interested to find out whether or not this is true in most cases. But just in case you guys are coming in here without any prior knowledge and you're just taking a look at the details here, if you find that this number is inaccurate, check the range as well. There's a confidence score over here on the right that'll actually start increasing the forecast standard deviation and increasing the range as well. And what that means is that instead of it just being this flat number, this confidence score is actually providing us a range, and this one's smack dab in the middle of it. Now, the range is going to increase the lower the score goes. It's going to narrow its focus and also narrow the standard deviation as this increases. The reason we have a confidence score that increases is because there's more information, or there's more comparable properties, or there's more properties that are currently on the market right now. Whatever the case may be, this confidence score will increase or decrease even just on a weekly basis. So just keep that in mind. All the information that's coming into the system is going to make changes to what the estimates are for any of the properties nearby. All right, next section down, we've got our listing information. This could be incredibly crucial for you guys if you're coming into a brand new property, you're trying to get it listed, and lo and behold, you need to double check a couple pieces of information about it, or find out what the most recent listing was or who it was that they last spoke with. So this isn't always going to show you something that's quite as dated as this one, since it's almost 10 years old now. But what we're seeing here is just a link to a listing number, and then it shows us the most recent one, and the next most recent one, next most recent one, and so on. So it works in reverse chronological order, with the most recent one first, oldest one last. But when we click on this link, it's actually going to load all of these in Matrix. This way we can quickly do our research. If we have maybe a property that's brand new to us, we can find out more about the listings, click on each listing individually, so on and so forth. So it makes it really easy to kind of dive back and forth between Matrix and Realist. And actually later we'll talk about how to see the tax information coming from Realist in Matrix. Now I'm going to minimize that one. The next section down is actually going to be a little bit more top level. So what we're seeing here is, instead of it just being the information that was entered into the MLS, this last market sale and sales history is actually going to show us all of the transactions related to this particular property, whether it passed through the MLS or not. So what we're seeing in this case is that the most recent recording date that we had, so when the actual tax record changed from one person to the other, was in February of 2013. We can see that record here. So in this case, instead of the listing number being the most recent one on top and then the next most recent one here, with the last market sale and sales history, it's showing us the most recent transaction, and then it just goes into a historical record showing that same transaction and then moving back in time. Now, there's a couple notes on this particular section. When we see a sales price, pretty self-explanatory. These people sold the property to these people for this much money, and the recording date of that transaction was this date. Occasionally, you guys are going to find yourself in a situation like this particular property had, where we had Robert Tara Cope selling it to Robert and Tara Cope, but there was no value assigned to this. So they have a whole separate section that's just nominal changes. Now, a little bit more clear version of that is going to be this one here, where we see Espo Construction Company sold it to Charles and Eileen Cannon for $160,000 in 2004. Well, lo and behold, Charles and Eileen Cannon ended up putting that into a trust under her name. And then that was actually the change that occurred in 2004, a little bit later. But this one didn't have any money changing hands. So it's just a nominal change. Same thing goes here. We got the trust selling it to Tara Brother. Tara bought the property, ended up probably getting married to Robert, changed her last name, wanted to make sure that instead of it being under her name, it's actually under both of their names. And then, of course, they sold it to Michael Taylor. So pretty quick and easy to find out more information about a property this way. It's also really interesting sometimes to just look at the history. So here we have the Armstrongs buying it in 1993 for 110. We have the Armstrongs selling it to Espo Construction Company for a very small amount of money, less than a third of the value that they bought it for. And then they ended up selling it to the Cannons for a lot more money than even the original purchase. Of course, 11 years later. So the last section on here is going to be the mortgage history. This is going to show us just what's happened with the mortgages. It's been, again, interesting seeing this because I've been teaching this class since 2018. We finally had a new entry in December of 2020. Now, at the very bottom of this report, we do have the property map showing us the contextual view, indicating where the property is located with some street names nearby, and a parcel dimensions view. And I apologize, I see that we got a question in the chat. Why is it that sometimes it does not show the real AVM range values for some properties? Oh, and actually, I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but if you guys don't see a value added in here for an estimate, all that means is just that there wasn't enough information for them to produce a reliable number. So if you guys notice this isn't here, that just means that this particular property didn't have enough details for that estimate to be produced with any relevance or accuracy. That's a good question, though. Oh, and so on this parcel dimensions option, when you see these lot dimension lines laid out, just remember that this is all an estimate. So we got pretty specific details from the county to make sure that we can actually put those parcel dimensions in there. But each of these numbers could be off by a decent amount. And in fact, you can even see on this curve, because this is a little cul-de-sac here, we've got this curve at the front of the property. It's broken down into a bunch of separate numbers. Now, that doesn't even necessarily mean that these were separated out in a particularly perfect fashion. So this might be 18.4 and 21.2 and 21.3 and 19.5. And all of those could add an extra foot. So it may not be a good idea to just assume that this is gospel. Just take this as an estimate. And it even tries to clarify that here. But when we get back to the map to view where this property is physically located, the actual map view, so if I hit back up at the top here, we can also add those dimensions on the map by selecting a property and clicking this parcel dimensions button. But notice this is not giving us any indication that that's an estimate. So we're going to talk a lot more about that map a little bit later, but at least for now, we're going to leave that there and actually take our little 10-minute break. So we're going to talk when we get back about the customized view, and then we'll move back and start talking about all of these other tabs that we have at the bottom, at the top there. So we're going to start our 10 minutes. We'll just pretend it's the top of the hour. I will see you guys back here at 10:10. All right, we're getting back in it. So hopefully everybody's back here from lunch, uh, or not lunch. Hopefully you guys didn't try to squeeze a whole lunch in during that 10 minutes. I don't know if you guys have ever had jobs like that before where you're just like, I gotta scarf everything down real quick. Not ideal. Anyway, so we're back at it. So I mentioned before that there was a couple different ways for us to at least visually get rid of some of the clutter whenever we land on the property details page. Just these little collapsing options that we mentioned before. But one of the important things to know whenever we're actually dealing with anything in Realist is that the sections that are actually appearing on here are the sections that are going to be put onto the reports. Now, when I mentioned the reports earlier, we didn't really have any context. I'd like to provide some context on that. Down there at the very bottom of the screen, we have a print button and an email button. Now, what this means is that I'm actually going to be able to either print off a report with a varying amount of information depending on what I want, or I want to email a report to a particular client. Either of these options is going to be producing a PDF. One is either just going to be printed off or going to be emailed directly to a client. Now, when we click on either of these buttons, it's going to offer us two different choices. We can either choose quick print or we can choose customize print. And then the exact same options are available for the email, quick email, customize email. When we click on the quick print or quick email, it's actually going to take whatever tab you happen to be on at that moment. So for instance, if I switched over to the comparables tab and then went to print, quick print, it's only going to be printing the comparables tab. We also have the option to do this customize print, which as we can see is actually going to allow us to check the checkboxes of which tabs we want to include. The notable missing element here is market trends. Market trends is its own separate section. It used to be something that we were able to include, but as I mentioned before, we have had a kind of checkered past with whether or not people actually want this or whatever. But thankfully, there was a vocal minority whenever we ended up having the market trends removed last time that requested for it to return. But when they added it back, they made it so that it wasn't something that you could automatically share with a client. We'll show how to work with that in a moment here. But whenever I wanted to print off this particular property details page, I'm going to go down here to the bottom and do quick print. Again, it just grabs this tab. It's going to tell me I'm going to have a printable PDF that we can use. When I click on print, what this pulls up is the PDF in question. And as you can see, it can have a whole bunch of information on there all at once. This might include some of the elements that maybe aren't necessarily things I want to show. So like the cell score indicator was visually, at least for me, pretty large, took up a decent amount of space with a lot of explanation. The cell score in this case is actually rating low and shows the actual cell score, but there's no context provided here. Now, the estimated value section, on the other hand, actually does show pretty much the exact same information. We've got the real AVM showing what the estimate is, giving us a range, giving us a confidence score, and how large or small the standard deviation is. But if we've had this discussion with our client already, telling them, look, estimates on Zillow are not accurate, and then lo and behold, they get in here and they're seeing the exact same number or something even fashionably close to that, you're going to end up having a tough decision to, or a tough discussion to have with your client again. So what I would recommend doing is instead of just minimizing these, since clearly that didn't make any impact on our print, there's this customize view button up at the top right. So if I want to get rid of cell score indicator or estimated value or both even, I click on that customize view and it pulls up a screen that, just like we saw with any of the other screens in Realist, a bunch of checkboxes on one side, a bunch of the selected items on the other side. So in my case, I'm going to get rid of this propensity cell score by just unchecking it. And then I also wanted to get rid of the estimated value, which I can do by unchecking here, or again, we can click that X over on the side. If I needed to rearrange any of this stuff, I can't do that on this particular screen, but most of the other customized options will allow you to rearrange those. We'll see that more when we get into a couple of the other options in a minute here. So I've got this so that I don't have my estimated value. I don't have my sell score indicator. Maybe they don't even want their mortgage history to be added. I can uncheck that, hit apply, and now my report is actually simplified down. So this time when I do the quick print, it's not going to include those sections that I didn't want. The report's going to be a little bit shorter. I think they were both still 2 pages. Oh, nope, this one actually did spill onto a 3rd page. So now I've actually simplified my report down enough that it all fit on 2 pages. Still a little weird separation of this particular section, but yeah, nice and easy to read. We're good to go. Now, there is one other option that we didn't discuss when we were looking at the customized view. I'm going to get us back down to this location information and the characteristics. So let's say that I had been discussing all of the property details with this client, and lo and behold, it turns out this particular property was some kind of historical property. Up here at the top right corner again, under that customized view, beyond just removing any of the sections or adding them back, there is also an option up here that allows us to change between fixed and dynamic. Now, the dynamic view, as you guys saw when we were going through, it's just the default option. This is only going to show the attributes that have value. So for instance, when we're looking back at this, under my location information, I don't see any references whatsoever to the historical preservation district. Or down here in the characteristics section, I'm not seeing anything that mentions what the roof is made of. So if that was something that, oh, actually roof material is included, but construction type, or make sure that's also not included. Yeah, anyway, whatever the details are that you're looking for, they may not actually be present on that tax record. And because that field was not filled, it's not going to appear when we're looking at it. So in our characteristics, it's funneled everything down to just the information that's actually available for this property. So when I go back up to customize view, let's switch over to the fixed view, and notice this is saying that it's going to show all of the available attributes. Now, when it says all available attributes, that's referring to everything that any county within our area can actually keep track of, which means that if I go up to this location information, now I see historic preservation code, historic preservation district, and neither of those has any details filled in. Those are just both blank. A little further down under our characteristics section, this has suddenly dramatically expanded. In fact, I'm actually going to zoom out so we can see even more. When I zoom out here, you can see tons of different extra fields that are just not being tracked. Oh, roof type. I knew that there was a roof option that was missing. The roof material is there. The roof type is something that either isn't being tracked for this property or isn't being tracked in this county. So just bear that in mind, that there's 2 different ways for us to view this. The best argument that I can make towards doing the fixed view, like what we're looking at now, is if you guys get used to switching between counties and you get used to seeing specific pieces of information on all of your reports, and then look at a property from a different county, and lo and behold, they don't even keep track of that, or that property in particular doesn't have that information, then you'll get confused. Why am I not seeing that thing that I've always seen? But if you come up to the top here, you can switch over to the fixed view and see all of the fields all the time. The biggest problem that I have, and my main complaint with the fixed view, is that whenever we try to print this, I go to quick print, yeah, okay, and now that 2-page report, or I think 3 was initially what we had, 3-page report, now has all of these blank fields. So just whole sections where there's just a bunch of blank information. Even on that final page of the report, the property map was just the very last thing that was included. Instead, now we've got the property map being pushed down by foreclosure history, and there's a bunch of extra details in the characteristics that, I mean, could have probably all fit onto that first page. It just gets very cluttered, and for no purpose, because we don't see any extra information. It's literally just showing us blanks. So I prefer the dynamic view. I think that that's going to be the best option. It is the default view, so you guys don't have to worry about making any manual changes. But just bear that in mind that if you guys ever need it, it's up there under the fixed view. All right, let's move on now to the comparables. The comparables is going to actually be an automated screen. Now, what that means is that when I first land on here, it just immediately found some properties in the vicinity that were supposedly comparable. I can see on here that we've got some basic characteristics. We've got the sales price, high, low, and median. Notice it's not showing us an average because those can be thrown off by an outlier. We see the building square footage, again, high, low, median, so on and so forth. And then we can actually take the comparables, so the ones that are actually being summarized up here, and see each of the individual characteristics about those down here. Now, it's notable that in this particular case, all of the properties that it found with the MLS being the provider of that bedroom count. Again, it's just one of the weird things about Tulsa County. For whatever dumb reason, they don't keep track of bedrooms. So this is being augmented by the information provided by Matrix. Now, this is also, importantly, a very short list of comparables. If you do find yourself in a situation where you're just kind of doing your research, you just wanted to find some comparables real quick, you're not really trying to do a CMA immediately, at least. Up here at the top right corner, there is a search criteria button. We didn't have this on our property details because it was just looking at the property itself. The search criteria button is going to allow us to choose how we search for the comparable properties based on the information in those property details. Now, it starts us off with a bunch of default options. 20 is the default option, sorts by the stuff that's the closest. So finding the ones that are in the immediate vicinity of the property or hopefully in that same subdivision, et cetera, et cetera. We see that the data source is going to include both, but you do have the option to restrict it to just tax information or just MLS information. This could change which results you're going to find. Not necessarily something I would recommend messing with too much. Leave it on both. That's the best option. It includes the most information. You're going to find the most relevant results. A bunch of these other ones we're just not even going to bother discussing because the distance from subject is going to be one of the key elements you need to change. So beyond making sure that you guys have a number of comparables that's sufficient for you, changing the distance from the subject is going to be one of the key elements. And then also changing the time period is important as well. If you guys do end up sticking around for our CMAs and Matrix class, which is from 1 to 2 this afternoon, it's an elective CE credit class. We're going to be discussing a whole bunch more about how to find comparables, why you need them, what the relevance is, how to make sure that you guys are finding truly relevant, accurate, comparable properties. But the key things that you guys will need to know for that is the distance, so the area that you're working within, and then also the time frame. Now, there's another element that I'll save for the CMAs and Matrix class, but those are two of the biggest things that you guys need to keep track of. Since this is going to be aggregating information from all over the place, there's another element that's going to be important in Matrix that we don't even bother with Realist because this is just looking at only the properties that have sold recently. Now, the distance is something that you guys might have to change if you're in an area that the market may fluctuate a little bit, but it's mostly the exact same properties in that particular area. So you can expand your search without having to worry about finding properties that are vastly different sizes or vastly different prices. Maybe it's all just kind of a homogeneous mix. There is no subdivision nearby that's just radically different pricing. But the search time period is going to be something that you guys might want to mess with if you are working with a property that's maybe rural. So for instance, we've increased our distance and we're still not finding any extra results. If it's a rural area, the market is probably not going to be shifting so much that you're going to have to worry about only finding results recently. Now, thankfully, Realist only allows you to go back to the last 12 months. That is, in fact, actually the official recommendation that we as the MLS and the National Association of Realtors would like to make as far as searching back for comparables. If you guys go back further than a year any of the properties that you find might have prices that are just radically different from what the property's true value could be in this market, because you're looking at a year ago and not just properties that might have sold, a month ago, a week ago, 6 months ago. So just remember that the relevance is going to decrease the further back you go. And there's also a very good likelihood that the relevance of the properties you find is going to decrease the further away you go. Because again, within a mile could be the difference between the proverbial right side of the tracks and wrong side of the tracks. The values of those properties could be radically different. The living area and the lot area, I would recommend just leaving those on the default as well at 15%. If you guys get lucky and find that whatever the properties that you're searching for are producing a vast amount of results, you guys finally get the opportunity to narrow the focus a little bit, you do have the option to change those to be a little bit more focused in on a 10% difference on each of those, or 5% even. Last options on here are just basic. This one's the style. Don't put in the style. Fortunately, from my experience, I've noticed a lot of people, even professional real estate agents, don't actually have as much understanding of the difference between each of the styles. I sure didn't, and I was an art major in college, so we used to have a class that we had somebody come in and teach, and I mean, there was some very, very specific elements that defined whether something was a bungalow versus a ranch style house. There was actually a specific architectural style called modern. It wasn't something, it's to let you guys know, we are actually in a quote unquote postmodern era, or postmodern. I don't even remember what the terminology is nowadays, but modern was actually something that was popularized in the like 60s or 70s, I think it was. So even if you think you know what the style is, if you don't put one in, you're going to still be able to track down the results and hopefully find properties that have similar specifications, even if the style doesn't match, because the style isn't always as relevant. The land use, on the other hand, actually does have something added in here. It says same as subject. I wish that there was an option to keep track of that for the style, but some counties just don't even bother putting in the style. That's fine, doesn't matter. The land use is far more important, because if you have a single family residence, you will only want to see other single family residents. You don't want to see the factory built property, mobile home down the road. You want to see other properties that are houses. Now, once we've chosen all of the characteristics of our search, we have a save and submit button down at the bottom that takes whatever these characteristics that I've put in and save it as a default. If I'm only interested in just making some adjustments for this particular property, so if I just wanted to say the last 9 months and I just wanted to go 3/4 of a mile out, I can submit that for now without changing any of the defaults that I came in on. So when I hit submit, it redoes my search, but it did not change my defaults, so that if I grab a different property later on today, I'm not going to accidentally find a whole bunch of properties that are not relevant. So you can do save and search, or save and submit, change your defaults, or just simply submit for just this moment. Now, all of this is well and good, but we still haven't actually produced the report that we're interested in. The comparables that we found have been presented to us here, where we've got all 8 of them. I can see, all right, this is all done in, as you guys saw in that search criteria option, it's going to be sorted by the distance. So maybe these 2 at the very outskirt here might not be relevant, or it might just even just be this one. So I can uncheck that checkbox. Notice it zooms me in on the map a little bit to make sure it only shows the properties that I've selected. Now I can actually hit this generate report button, and it'll produce a report with only those listings that I found. So just the ones that I had the checkbox on. So this is what the final report, quote unquote, is going to look like. When we print this or email this, it is going to be condensed into just a PDF that we can use. Go back to Realist for a second. So we can see the map up here at the top. We can zoom in and zoom out. Of course, we can't on the print. We can see our search criteria, so that the client can also try and produce the exact same search function if they need to. We've got our summary statistics showing our subject property, as well as the high, low, median, and an average, which in this case looks like it's been thrown off by that property that was significantly undervalued, or might have been perfectly valued for what it really was. I shouldn't say it's undervalued, just a different price than the others, I should say. A little further down, we have a side-by-side comparison that we can do between our subject property and any of the properties that we found. There's a little arrow to the right here, and there's also a scroll wheel towards the very bottom. Of course, the arrows move with you, so you can actually see the lines lining up rather than having to scroll down to the bottom, move your cursor, and then come back up here just to check what the price was or whatever the case may be. All right, that's it for the comparables tab. Market trends tab is even easier. Market trends is just going to give effectively a finger on the pulse of the market. The main thing that I actually wanted to show you guys is going to be these two top charts here. The median sales price for tax. This is indicating what the sales price was for all properties in the tax record, end of story. The median sales price for MLS is actually going to be keeping track of what properties sold within the confines of a relationship with an agent, getting the listing put into the MLS, getting that extra value that an agent can provide. So what we're seeing here is actually effectively a comparison between doing a FSBO or trying to sell your property on your own versus trying to sell that property with an agent. So this is actually a very valuable thing to show to clients if you do end up in a situation where maybe a client isn't sure whether or not they actually want to move forward with an agent. But just like with any other charts and graphs, and I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have been looking at recently, but oh my gosh, it's just nuts how much information we're being inundated with on a daily basis. I mean, it used to make a joke about, oh, this is the USA Today kind of chart styles, but you guys see charts all the time, whether it's talking about COVID or price increases or market values, or I mean, it's just so much. But as with any of those other charts, a lot of very obvious information can be hidden that you guys might not be able to notice unless you're actually reading the information on here. So keep track of what the indexes are here. So in our case, the top of the tax side of things is 250. The end of the tax side of things is November 2021. If I go down to the chart immediately below it, I might think that this uptick at the end here is actually showing that, oh, it looks like it's at least getting closer to the 250 line that I saw at the top here. But this is for February. This is information that got recently updated because we have data from the MLS that's fed directly into Realist rather than waiting on county information to get solidified from last year. So if I scroll down here, I can see I've got 300,000 as the top. My 250,000, that's the top here and doesn't have anything coming close to it, is getting breached frequently by different months. And my end point here is February. So if I wanted to do a true side-by-side comparison, I would have to hold my cursor over this and see in November of 2021 for this zip code, it was 220,000 for the median sales price. Go down here to November, 220,000. So the exact same thing. So as far as the benefit of a realtor in this particular case, that zip code looks like it's pretty on point between for sale by owner, things that are passing between family hands. But if I go back even a little bit to, let's say, August, I can see in August, we capped out on the MLS side of things at 256,000. That was our median sales price. Meanwhile, August for the county was 239. So even though there might have been a dip that could have been, a series of listings that were sold together, some kind of bulk listing, whatever the case may be, you might need to double check this and say, all right, yeah, there was a dip at the end of this chart, but for the most part, brokers and realtors are actually getting you more value for your property, which is good for you. So the next tab over is our neighbors tab. I don't like this particular piece of information, mostly just because of what people might end up doing with this. If you do end up presenting this information to a client, they may end up seeing that, oh, look, there's a rental property here, there's another rental property right here. That might be good, that might be bad. They may have perceptions about maybe a specific name that appears on here or Somebody even mentioned one time that there was like a number that they didn't like on one of the house numbers. It's there's just some bizarre conversations that I've heard that spawned because of this little neighbors tab. If they don't need the information because they've asked for it, there's probably a good likelihood you don't need to give this to them. Otherwise, they, you know, don't get the opportunity to actually go meet their neighbors the way that we all do. Go walk over to their house and say hi. Anyway, neighborhood profile is the last option. Then we're going to jump back to our map and the search functions, etc. Neighborhood profile is just going to break down this particular zip code. It used to actually make that pretty explicit up here at the top that the zip code was where we were going to be gathering information for the population, the age, the gender breakdown, the marital status, housing information, all that. All of this is all going to be based on the zip code. But the important thing to remember is this is all just demographic information. It's public access. There is no reason to try and hide any of this. It can also be beneficial if you have somebody that's, hey, look, I got a divorcee that's moving into this neighborhood. It's a 53-year-old dude. He sees that, looks like there's more women than men in this area. Looks like there's going to be plenty of people that are also not attached. So you can hopefully find somebody new. We've got housing statistics, so we can see the percentage of properties that are owned versus rented, which has increased pretty notably since I started teaching this class, and also vacant land has increased as well. We can see the fair market rents, another thing that's been skyrocketing recently. We also have the quality of life down here. Quality of life is going to be broken down by industry, and then also blue collar versus white collar. We've also got household income broken down. This one has also pretty dramatically decreased. We used to have some people that were breaching into the higher marks here, but looks like the average household income has dropped as time has gone on, even since 2020. Big surprise. We've got our commute method. Welcome to America. We don't have particularly great public transit, so hardly anybody's using it, of course. We've got weather temperature information, annual precipitation. This information actually is going to be a lot more expanded upon in RPR. If you guys haven't had any experience in RPR, I can't recommend it enough. They have classes on it. We have classes on it. Definitely learn more about that if you guys get a chance, because the neighborhood information in there is way more robust. A little further down, we have our local businesses. This is going to actually be something you guys have control over under the Customize View button, where we can choose which categories of businesses we're going to include and how many of those businesses we're going to include as well. So if we have our divorcee, he knows that he's got that Red Lobster there, so he doesn't have to go far to have a first date. Once you guys get more comfortable, you guys are going to Sonic, Qdoba, cool. All of that's pretty close by. Shopping also has some information in there too. So he's got a Quick Trip that's nearby, so we won't have to drive far for gas. There's an Albertsons nearby, so he knows that there's a grocery store within walking distance if worst case scenario happens. All that information is present on here. Now, I did actually remove a section for education and a section for the schools that are in the area. You guys can include this if you would like. The reason I did not is because it's going to show the schools based on proximity. So not necessarily who this family will be sending their kids to if they live in that property. This is just what's in the area. We can also choose whether or not we want to have public or private schools. And then we also have the education level. There we go. The education level. This just shows, what the highest level of education is that people have attained in the area. You can kind of combine this information with the age breakdown to make sure that you're not seeing that this area is like quote unquote undereducated. This is why they actually show the educational climate index, so that you don't get confused that, wait a second, there's a whole bunch of people that haven't graduated high school yet. Those aren't necessarily the adults. This is going to try and aggregate that information. Anyway, so that's it for our neighborhood profile. We do also have the option to choose between fixed and dynamic. Not really quite as relevant on here, but if you guys want to customize that further, you can. So let's head back. This brings us back to our default page that we saw earlier. So again, we have our map up at the top. We have our list of results down at the bottom. We have the search function over here on the left, which we got to switch between the overly basic quick search and the more customizable my search. So that's what we're going to be discussing next is our my search functions and some of the limitations that you might run into and how to fix those. So first and foremost, I'm going to clear out the details on my criteria, but you notice it doesn't clear out the dot on the map or the result in my list here. If I click clear all though, that will actually get rid of not only any of the criteria that I've entered, but also clear any of the results so that I'm back to a blank slate. I don't have to worry about having any clutter on my map right now. So let's actually run a search real quick here. Instead of using the default options that we have, which is starts with or is in the case of house number, I'm going to switch this over to an is between. So I'm going to put 1500 to 1600. And we're going to be searching along Peoria. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with Tulsa or local to Tulsa, you might recognize that doing 1500 to 1600 and just choosing Peoria is going to produce results in North Peoria as well as South Peoria. So I'm actually zoomed into the right spot here. So when I run this search, what it's going to do is it's actually going to find properties in North Tulsa as well as here in Midtown. Now, if I needed to try and add in an extra element so that I can actually find the properties that I was actually looking for, maybe the ones down here, or maybe the ones up here, I would actually have to add in either a pre-directional or post-directional to try and narrow that focus. In order to do that, you just use this customize search button up here at the top. Now, by default, the general query is actually going to have that golden padlock indicating that this is a system preference. So you do not have the option to actually modify the general query. But the good news is it has all of the elements already checked off. So we can see the checkboxes and I can't actually uncheck it. But over here on the right, I can't rearrange anything or remove anything. None of that matters because if I want to add something, it's just going to automatically turn this into a custom search. So I'm going to switch over to the tab over here on the left, geography, and I'm going to add in the pre-direction. Now, when I click the pre-direction checkbox, notice it's no longer the general query. And all of a sudden over here on the right, my selected attributes has opened up so that I can actually start removing things that I don't need. So like I'll get rid of township, range, and section. And I can move this pre-direction up to the relevant spot. So street name, house number, pre-direction, street name, suffix. Maybe I even want to add in my post direction. Switch over to geography again, post direction. Put that there with the street suffix, either before or after, whichever you prefer. Depends on the county as far as how that's actually going to display. And then we also maybe wanted to add in whether this was owner occupied. So I'm going to go to owner information, and here's owner occupied. Check the checkbox, move that back up here to the top, right underneath where I have owner name. So there's a couple different ways for us to do this. Just like we saw when we were looking at the comparables, when we clicked on that search criteria option and then chose the different criteria, we had that save and submit, or we had just simply submit. If I click save here, it's actually going to need to have a name assigned to it so that it'll remember all of the different options that I've chosen and save that as a future saved search. If instead I'm actually just wanting to apply it just for this one search, just for right now, I can just click apply and it brings me back to my search criteria where I can just go ahead and start moving along. So now I'm going to actually switch my house number back over to is between. Do 1500 to 1600. And this time I'm going to say north and Peoria. There we go. It's also worth mentioning, since I was going to mention this earlier and forgot, the street suffix section actually only allows for 4 characters to be entered. Had a question about this a while ago, but boulevard, lane, stuff like that, that's the maximum amount of characters that you can put in. So let me just say avenue. So always just remember it's the truncated version of the streets type, street suffix. So now when I hit search, it's going to focus me into just those properties up here on North Peoria. So quick and easy. We also wanted to mention the township range and section. I've just removed those, so I'm going to go back to geography, township range section, apply. The township range and section are similarly going to be just only a couple characters long. It's important to remember that when you guys are looking at township range and section, what you're actually looking for is going to be 2 numbers and then a direction for township and range, and then the section is just 2 numbers. That means that if you guys are working in an area where the township is 9 north, what you should be entering is 09N. And that way you guys will be able to track down your results. I'm going to clear all of that off the map. So that's about it for the My Search functionality. You can add in those extra details. You can switch between is between, is greater than, is less than. Most of those are self-explanatory, but if you guys have questions, give us a call. Now we're actually going to move on to how to interact with the map, because I think the map is the coolest thing about this. And then after we start using our map, we're going to talk about the exports. So I want to focus in now on my map, but you notice we've got a whole section over here on the side that's being cluttered up with the search criteria. I just want to use the map to run my search. So I'm going to click on this little double arrow here. If I hold my cursor over it, it says collapse search bar. And when that gets minimized over to the side, I now have a little white tab with the search icon here. I can click on that and bring it right back. So I can collapse, expand at will. But that only made my search space a little bit wider. What I need to do is get rid of this list. We can either grab the little bar in between to adjust how long or how short it is, or we can just click on this map button and it'll just collapse that for you. So now we get to focus in exclusively on our map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click now on the little pen icon, this drawing tools option. And it's going to give me a couple basic choices. So I can define an area that I want to search by a radius. So that'll just be a perfect circle. We can do a rectangle where I've just got a little square of space that I'm going to be drawing onto the map. Or I can use the polygon tool so that if I have a little unusual area, so like if I wanted to grab some of the information about these properties here, but not the properties down in the corner here, what I can do is just click on either radius. It's like that's going to include way more properties than I wanted to. So I click on it, delete shape. I can use my rectangle tool. I just wanted to do from Reading in Peoria and just grab the things on the north side of Highway 75. But as you can see, it's included a couple of this extra parcels down here at the bottom. That's not what I want. So again, click on the shape, delete shape. This time I'm going to use my polygon tool. Now, the easiest explanation I can offer for the polygon tool is that think of it like the old conspiracy theory boards. You know how they had like the pin with the string connecting everything? Each click, think of that as a pin, and the string is actually not going to be defined until you click again. So the next time I drop a pin, that solidifies the string between that first click, the first pin, and then the next time I click, it solidifies that string. So notice the line that it produced is actually a little darker than the one that's currently following my cursor around. And again, once I click, I can now move at a different angle, further up, click, and then just click on the initial pin again, and that'll solidify the shape so that I can now click on this and hit search. This is going to drop pins on all of the properties that have any overlap whatsoever with the shape that I've created. Now, one of the handy things about the polygon tool is that you guys can also find these little faint dots in between. So it's actually perfectly smack dab in the middle here. The 2 pins that we have. And if I click on that, it actually adds that as an additional pin. So I can use that to kind of customize my shape even further in case maybe something that I was hoping to get was not being included. There we go, like so. But let's say that I do end up having a pin or a shape that's accidentally uh, overlapped with a property. So for instance, I just gave myself maybe even just a few feet worth of, oops, let me zoom back out again. I'm gonna have to zoom into the right spot here. Oops. There we go. All right, now I can zoom in. So right here, when I initially ran this search before I accidentally moved my shape, I just have a little bit, just this tiny little sliver of space that actually overlapped with this particular property. So it's important to remember that whenever you guys are actually running your searches, make sure that the only area that you guys are actually covering are the properties that you're actually interested in seeing. Now, just as a reminder, if I do end up having my search results include something that I didn't want, I can open up my list, switch it over to the table view, see all of the different properties this way, and get rid of any of the ones that I don't like. Or if I go back to split and click on that property that like low Eda James, low Eda James, I can uncheck that so that if I print it or email it or need to produce labels or whatever the case is that I'm working on this for, I don't have to worry about it. I can just uncheck it. It will no longer be in any of my reports. You can see that that actually removes it from the map as a checkbox. All right. Now, once we have any results, we do have a couple different ways for us to get that information out. We can either export this. We'll do a quick export in this case, and it's going to just take the basic information that we have from this table that we see here. And we can uncheck any of the things that we don't want, if there's something that we don't need. But all of the information is going to be dumped into an Excel spreadsheet. It's actually a specific file format called a CSV file. It's one of the oldest ways that you guys can actually get a spreadsheet put together. It's comma separated values or something like that. But it's a pretty old file format. So no matter what version of Excel you guys are using, or even if it's not Excel at all, you guys should be able to open up that spreadsheet. It's a great way to start off with mail merges, things like that. But if you guys want to have a little bit more control over what's appearing on there, besides just simply the fields that show up here, you can do customize export, and it pulls up all of the details that you could ever need. You just check boxes for which ones you want, and it's going to do the exports from a total that you guys have on a property by property basis. So whenever you guys are doing exports, you'll notice that it always shows up with this little allowance that you guys have per month. I've already run 27, so it doesn't matter. Even if I'm running the exact same 27 again, it's going to deduce, or it's going to deduct another 27 because this is a second export. It doesn't matter how many elements we include, it's always going to base the number that is taken away from your allowance on how many you actually how many properties you chose. We also have the option to print. We can do the reports. In this case, there's too many reports, so we can't do that. We'd have to just limit this down to 25. We also have the option to print off the map and table, which is actually going to be effectively a simplified view of literally what we see here. We can also print just the map, just the table, or even the cards view, which you guys might have noticed I switched out of. Now, when you guys are switching over to the list view, you may notice that it switches you to this card style view. This is really handy if there's a bunch of properties that have been listed because they'll have the primary photo from the property. But it's worth noting as well that you guys can switch over to the table view and the card view at will up at the top there. We also have the option to customize this table. So beyond just being able to, I want to rearrange this so that the address is at the beginning. So I'm going to click. Oops. Oh, there it goes. I have to click on the word address. You can click and drag to move these around. Go. County. Now I got owner name, owner occupied. Perfect. Maybe this is the order that I like. I can go back to my export And you'll notice that now it's actually in that order. So it makes it really easy to kind of customize how your report will go out or how your export will go out. We also have the option to customize the table further using this show hide columns option. And what this is going to allow us to do is see, again, all of the different criteria that you could ever use. You can rearrange them over on the side here as well. So instead of having to click and drag and hopefully move over and over and over, you guys can just go into the show hide columns option and rearrange things a lot quicker from here. But that's it for customizing our results. If we have finally decided that, all right, these are all the ones that I wanted to send off for mailing labels, let's say that I was putting together an advertising campaign or whatever the case may be, there's a labels button down here at the bottom. This allows us to choose between 3 of the different basic Avery options. We can use either mixed case or all capital letters, which I'm a little bit more partial to. I know it makes it seem like you're yelling at anybody that you're sending stuff to, but for people that have the uppercase, lowercase combinations like a MC at the beginning of their name or Vincent or something like that, where the V's are all lowercase, but then for some reason, some systems will capitalize the V at the beginning, even though it's not supposed to be. Whatever. Use all capital letters, offend everyone, but also no one. C'est la vie. We also have the option to choose between the address being either the tax billing address, which means that hopefully you'll be reaching out directly to the owner, or you can mail this directly to the property address, which will hopefully then reach whoever's the occupant. We do have a choice here to do show current owner. This is actually going to appear above the name that's actually showing up on the address. So the owner's name will appear and then the address will appear underneath that. You can also choose instead to do create custom label. So you can put in owner or current resident. So whatever you needed to. There's also a choice to include foreign addresses or eliminate any duplicates. So especially if you guys are working in an area where there's, one person that owns a whole bunch of rental properties, you can just simplify your mailing just to be only the properties that have unique names and addresses. Because again, it's going off the tax billing address by default. So if you have a bunch of properties that have the same owner, instead of getting a whole bunch of labels that are printed with the same name address, you can just simplify that down. So I recommend using that as a default anyway. But just like we saw with exporting to Excel, we do have an actual limit to how many times we can print random stuff like this off. So this is considered an export of the data. Thankfully, we do have the option to manually increase that if you guys need it. I haven't come across too many legitimate cases for that, but I have heard of people having like an admin or somebody in the office that's kind of like a background character to the rest of you guys' work. And they'll be producing reports and sending out mailers and stuff like that. And we've had some people like that we have to manually go in and increase how many exports they have. But there are some extra options back on the map. So if you guys would like to play with the map at all, the good news is the rest of this stuff is actually producing things or finding results and all that other stuff. I can't stress this enough. Get into the systems and start playing with some of these options. So for instance, boundaries, this might be purely contextual. You may never need this or you may use this all the time. But adding boundaries to the map, you can add zip codes, city lines, and county lines, school district lines, flood zones. There's just a vast amount of information that you guys can overlay onto the map. You may use none of them, like just leave the parcel option and then only use the flood zone just so that you guys can learn a little bit more about that. Or you may just set it so that you can see the school district because you're constantly working with families. You need to know what school district they might be in. Or you might want to not use either of those and use the pin here for property and sales. You can keep track of all of the properties that have sold according to the tax record in the last 3 months, all the properties that are active or expiring or pending sold in the MLS. But just remember, there is a limit to how much you can actually add to the map, and it's going to be 6 of these checkboxes. So make sure that you guys are only using the ones that you need, because the default is parcel. So you'll only ever have those 5 options that you can add. But play around with these, check out what else you guys can do. And if you have any problems or questions in Matrix or Realist or Transaction Desk, give us a call over at the service desk and we can help you out. I'm going to put our phone number back up on the screen here, and we'll leave the session open for just a couple minutes, just in case you guys have a question. But if you guys would like to learn more about these systems, you can play with them or just give us a call. We can help you out. I'll be getting the recording of this class sent out probably within the next hour or so. If you guys do have any questions in the interim, though, again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here for you. I'm going to put the music back on. We'll leave the session running for another minute here. Again, if you guys have any questions for me immediately, don't hesitate to ask. Use that Q&A or chat, whichever option. But hopefully we'll see you guys in future classes. Just so you guys are aware, we're hopefully going to be presenting some in-person classes towards the end of next month. The numbers here in Tulsa are finally reasonable enough that we can hopefully have some in-person classes without anybody getting infected with COVID. So I'm looking forward to that. But music on. Let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully we'll see you in future classes.